about the only guy in Western Europe right now, maybe even in the Western world, talking about the BP Horizon disaster, because the mainstream media would have you believe that it's all over, it's all done, it's all dusted, and it's actually been that way since the middle of July, so forget it, move on. Let me tell you, this hasn't even started yet. You know, there is way more here than is being shared in the media and has been shared in the media right from the outset. So what I'm going to do over the course of the evening, we're going to divide it into two halves. I'm going to speak for about just over an hour and a quarter to start with, and give you the detail of what actually occurred here. I'm going to give you chapter, line and verse, because I'm BP's worst nightmare, because I have 20 years in the oil industry. I worked with a company called Schlumberger, and who, as you'll see, Schlumberger had a very, very significant role to play on the BP Deepwater Horizon rig, but you're not reading anything about that in the mainstream media. And I know BP are watching me, because I gave a presentation in a town in the UK a few weeks ago, and at the end of the evening, when people were coming up and asking questions, and somebody slipped me a piece of folded paper, which I just put in my pocket because I thought it was a business card or a website that somebody wanted me to take a look at. When I got home and I unfolded it, it was BP headed paper, and written on it in big print was "Thank you very much!" exclamation mark. And that was it. So they're just letting me know that they are actually taking note. And I also discovered that Amazon have taken down my DVD, which is called BP, Population Reduction and the End of an Age. But as you'll see as we go through this, the power of BP, the power of the corporations to control what is or isn't on the web when they really want to is enormous. This is the guy who was chairing BP at the time of the disaster, Tony Hayward. His performance in the immediate aftermath of the disaster can only be described as pathetic, because the guy refused to take any ownership, to demonstrate any degree of accountability or responsibility. In fact, a first-line supervisor would have taken more responsibility than this guy took. In the early hearings, you can hear him saying such things as, I wasn't involved in that discussion. I didn't speak with those people. Now, this is a guy who was the CEO of the company. I mean, obviously, in the immediate aftermath, he should have been calling everybody and anybody in the organisation to make sure he was fully and properly briefed. But I believe he was set up. I believe he was set up, and I believe that he very quickly came to the realisation that this guy was so far out of his depth that he had no experience of managing an organisation like BP in the geopolitical arena. I mean, he's no Lord Brown. Lord Brown is not particularly popular in the oil industry. I mean, in his tenure at the helm of British Petroleum, he turned it from a relatively modest oil company into a major player. And in fact, even today, BP is larger than any American oil company. And of course, BP was quite predatory, buying up companies like Amoco. So in fact, BP effectively owns Alaska, and has owned its politicians, as you'll see in the second half of the evening. Now, when we get into the second half of the evening, I'm going to try and put these events into a sort of global context with everything that is occurring right now, and I can promise you that there will be a positive note to finish. And at the end of the evening, we'll have the opportunity for a few questions and answers. But then I have to run off because I have to get the night train to Malmö. So sorry I can't stay around and chat for too much longer. But this guy, Tony Hayward, he was paid £4 million, which of course is about just over $6 million US dollars. But there's some clues here. There's some clues that he knew that something was going to happen. He didn't know what. I don't believe for one second this guy had any idea as to what was about to occur, but he definitely knew. Now, so did I. And that's why I feel compelled to share my information and my inside track on what occurred on the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. Not specifically. I didn't know what specifically was going to occur. But my specialist area of study for the last 12 years has been deep geopolitics, which is looking at the deep belief system, the deep agenda of everything that's occurring. And let me give you an idea of what that's like. It's like actually sitting down at a chessboard, never having seen the game of chess before, and playing a grandmaster. You know, somebody who has played this game through generations. They know the rules, they know the strategies, they know every little intricacy of the game, but you as a novice know nothing. And after a few games, you get to at least appreciate the moves, so you know how the pieces move. And then after a few more games, you might be able to string a few moves together. And then after a few more games, you might actually be able to take one of the pieces of your opponent. And after a long time, maybe, you can actually start to threaten your opponent, because you'll be able to start to work out what your opponent is thinking and what your opponent's going to do next. And then who knows, maybe one day, you might actually be a serious threat to your opponent and actually get him to the point where he's in check. And then one day we might actually achieve a state of checkmate. Well, where we're at right now is basically we're still learning the basic moves. And they know that some of us know the moves. And in fact, Dr. John Coleman, writing 20 odd years ago in a book called The Committee of 300, acknowledged that these guys always acknowledge that there are 13% of the population who know what they're doing at any given time. And their challenge is to make sure that 13% doesn't come together and doesn't start to share their knowledge, share their information, and consequently, and actually start to learn their strategy and work out what they're going to do. Well, I've had a few, dare I say, successes. In June of 2006, I was giving a presentation, and unfortunately everything I'm telling you can find on the web, but I gave a presentation at a conference in Chicago. It was a 9/11 Truth Conference in Chicago on the weekend of the 3rd and 4th of June 2006. And before I went to Chicago, I had a real sense of foreboding that the guys who perpetrated 9/11 were about to do another one. They weren't going to let the date of the 6th of June 2006, i.e. 666, pass without leaving their mark. So I thought, well, you know, what are they going to do here? So I Googled the zip code, the US zip code of 60606, and I came up with Sears Tower, Chicago. And of course, that was just a few miles from where I was scheduled to be giving the presentation on the 3rd and 4th of June. And then I discovered that Larry Silverstein had just acquired the lease of Sears Tower a few weeks before. And of course, Larry Silverstein was the guy who acquired the lease of the World Trade Center complex just a few weeks before 9/11. Well, I gave this presentation and I explained that I thought that these guys were going to launch a false flag attack. I thought it was going to be on Chicago, I thought it was going to be Sears Tower, and it was going to occur on the following Tuesday, the 6th of the 6th of the 6th. And I gave this presentation on Saturday. Word got out through the local news channels, and they came to the conference organisers, asked me to give the presentation again on the Sunday so they could film it and broadcast it. You won't find any of those broadcasts anywhere on the web, but you will find my presentation. Anyway, as you will know, nothing happened. But if you Google Sears Tower terror, what you'll come up with is the articles that appeared in the mainstream media in the USA on the 17th of June, so basically less than 2 weeks after I gave the presentation. And on the 17th of June, a terror cell was arrested in Miami with detailed plans of Sears Tower. So just by putting it out there, you know, did we manage to maybe stop something? I don't know. When I was here 2 years ago, I gave a presentation on Codex Alimentarius, talking about the United Nations, i.e. World Bank, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization plan to completely destroy the natural farming industry and to wipe out the complementary and alternative healthcare industry. And of course that's happening. You know? And it's going to continue to happen until they've achieved that goal. And then a little over a year ago, I gave a presentation at the end of March of 2009, just after the release of the swine flu virus in Mexico. And that got recorded as a DVD called The Truth Injection, where I spelled out all the history of the swine flu, bird flu virus, and I said this is going to be the pandemic, this is going to be a massive campaign to vaccinate people across a global basis, and the vaccinations will not be pure. And consequently, I was, although not named, but I was effectively targeted in the British media and being called an extremist last year for challenging the British government's campaign to get everybody vaccinated with the swine flu vaccine. Fortunately, the vast majority of people didn't. And then on June the 19th of this year, June the 19th, that was one of the days, about 5 days into the no flying in Northern Europe, because apparently there was a volcano in Iceland that was sending ash clouds across Northern Europe. You'll probably remember those days because they were the clearest skies anybody's ever seen in Europe. But I was stuck in a hotel in Lisbon on April the 19th. I was on my way back from Mozambique, where I'd been visiting with my daughter, who's a diving instructor down there. And I had a real sense of foreboding, just like I'd had before I went to Chicago. And I thought, you know, these bastards are going to launch an attack over the 19th or 20th. I don't claim any special insight. Again, it's knowing how they play. April the 19th and 20th is very, very significant in the occult belief system of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. It is the day of sacrifice by fire. April the 19th, 1993 was the day that the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Division of the FBI launched their unprovoked attack on the David Koresh compound in Waco, murdering at least 72 people, many of them children, and who met their deaths through fire because they were in the basement when the complex was burned. 2 years later, April the 19th, 1995, was the day of the supposed attack by Timothy McVeigh, the lone gunman, who supposedly set off a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City. If you look at the pictures, the physical evidence of the destruction of the Alfred P. Murrah building absolutely belies the official story. There's no way that building was destroyed by a fertilizer truck bomb. It was destroyed from bombs with the inside. And there's a lot of local news footage where the first responders were not allowed into the buildings because other bombs, other unexploded bombs, had been discovered. But once again, many people were killed, many of them children, because there was a nursery on the first floor of the Alfred P. Murrah building. April 20th, 2001 was the day of the Columbine High School massacre. So I thought April 19th, 20th, these guys are going to do another one. So I put a newsletter out. I sent a newsletter out, which goes out to my mailing list, which is about 8,500 people or so. And I said, look, you know, be vigilant, be very vigilant, because something is going to happen within the next 24, 48 hours. These guys are going to launch another event, which is effectively going to be a sacrifice by fire. Well, of course, in Europe on the 20th, nothing happened, because this event happened at 9 o'clock in the evening on April 20th in the Gulf of Mexico. So, you know, we were 6 hours time difference or so. So it was when I woke up on April the 21st, and I opened my email, and there was a whole bunch of emails from people in the US saying, Ian, is this the event? Is this what you were talking about? And you know, my immediate reaction was, I don't think so. The reason being is, after 20 years in the oil industry, I didn't want to believe that, you know, my former colleagues in the oil industry would ever perpetrate such an event as this. I knew that other forces could be brought to bear, because as many of you will know, I was one of the first civilians to go into Kuwait, which is actually what started me on this particular path. I was one of the first civilians to go into Kuwait at the end of hostilities after the first Gulf War. And as I was driving around Kuwait, it became very apparent to me that the evidence did not support the official version of events. The oil fires in Kuwait in 1991 were set alight by American special forces, to be blamed on Saddam, so that Saddam could be demonized in the eyes of the world, and obviously sanctions could be brought to bear, and Iraqi oil could be kept off of the global market. And in fact, if you do the research, you will find that Saddam and Tariq Aziz, who currently is sentenced to death in Iraq, Tariq Aziz, who is his Christian foreign minister, but both of them have always maintained that they were not responsible for setting the wells alight. But of course that never made it to the mainstream media, because, you know, the mainstream media needs to control the narrative. It needs to control the story. And that's completely the opposite, of course, of what we try and encourage within, for want of a better word, the truth movement.